Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you happen to be watching on. And if you're watching live, they will show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And I hope that you're having a lovely day. Today is Friday. It's our day for the weekly roundup of interesting stories. And my stories this week are basically personal stories. This week was my birthday week, and my attention has pretty much been entirely focused on things I have been doing. So I don't have a lot of wider stories for you today. But I guess I'll talk a little bit about what's been going on in my life. And if you have anything you'd like to talk about, please put it in the chat room and we can talk directly. And hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. And hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. And hello to Black Crystal in the chat room. It's good to see you, Black Crystal. And it's good to see all of you. So Tuesday was my 61st birthday. And it was also our soft opening for the Gaia thrift shop. And it turned out to be a very soft opening indeed, but we're continuing to work with it. And yesterday I put up some videos to show how we're coming along. On Tuesday, we had a number of products in the shop. We were still getting together the things to display them. We have quite a bit more now. And as you continue to follow us, you'll see much more coming in. We're hoping to make it quite an exciting little journey with you. And we hope that you will follow along with us. And I'm planning to do a broadcast specifically about the thrift store, which will be totally separate from this one, although I'm sure I'll be talking about the thrift store here. But two of the things I'm planning to talk about on Reverend Don's Closet. The first one is, what do you do when you get a pre-owned item from like a thrift store? Do you need to cleanse its energy? And if you do, how do you do that? You know, I was asked this question years ago on my daily vlog, so you can look that up and find my answer there. But, you know, that will be the subject of probably the first Don's Closet broadcast next week. Second one is going to be, how do you measure yourself? It's been brought to my attention that not everyone knows what their sizes are or how to figure them out. And if you don't know your sizes, you're going to have difficulty finding clothes that fit you, particularly if you're looking online. And, you know, half of the importance of the effect of your clothing is how well or how badly it fits. Now, that does change with style. Sometimes oversized clothing is very fashionable. And I can remember, I want to say back in the 90s, it was extremely popular for men to wear oversized shirts, even dress shirts. But generally, that's not the case. And it's good to know what your actual size is so that you can find what's really going to look good on you and what's going to properly fit you. And we'll be talking about how you do that. And that will be probably also next week. And I'm also looking for other things to talk about as we go forward with that broadcast. And of course, I'm always looking for things to talk about on this broadcast. On Tuesday also was my 61st birthday. We had planned to do a broadcast celebration. We were on for a few minutes. We really didn't do very much. The day just didn't lend itself to that, but it was a lovely day. I got to meet numerous people who came in for my birthday. We had wonderful guests come to the shop. We had Jazz from Earth Spirit Emporium. We had Susan Dancing Star. We had Christiana Highcorrell come up from Florida, along with David and Audrey. That was wonderful. And we had Renee Bauta come down from Chicago. That was wonderful. And it was good to see all of these people and get to spend time with them, and many other people I've gotten to see. This week also was marked by a tragedy in the family. Those of you who are familiar with my nephew Jason, his brother has passed away after a traffic accident, and I want to take a moment to extend my condolences to Jason and everyone in the family for this very unexpected passing, this very tragic passing. And that which is remembers lived, that which is remembered lives, and we certainly will remember Chandler and pray for his well-being in the world of spirit. Janet says sizes change with age and weight. Yes, they do. And that's why knowing how to take your size is important, because it may not be what you previously thought that it was. My sizes now are drastically different than they were a year and a half ago. Because I'm almost 100 pounds thinner than I was a year and a half ago. So even my neck size is not the same as it was. And so knowing how to take your measurements is a very important thing. And in the chat room, Mary and others are sending their love to Jason and his family. And, I'm sure they appreciate all prayers and condolences. Yes, sizes, even things you don't think of as changing, do change with both age and weight. Your shoe size. If you had your shoes sized when you were young, as you undoubtedly did, if you are now in your 30s or your 50s or older, they may have changed, even if your weight has stayed the same. As we get older, our feet effectively get bigger. Now, it isn't exactly that so much as that they spread out because you keep using them. But you'll find that you're likely to go up a size in shoes as you get older. And if you find yourself with things like edema, the swelling of your extremities, then you'll need to look at larger shoes for that as well. And so being able to take your size and being mindful that it will change can be very helpful. One of the things I plan to talk about in Reverend Don's closet are many of the little things about fashion you might not think about. Many of which I know, some of which I'm still learning. For example, I recently watched an Instagram where they talked about men's ties. That some men like to wear the back flap of their tie tucked into their belt, which I have done on occasion, but I never thought of it as a fashion statement. But now that I've seen it, I suppose it is actually quite useful because, today, ties have gotten longer. Presumably due to a desire for, shall we say, compensation on some people's parts. And ties have just gotten several inches longer than they had been through most of my life. And I personally do not want my tie hanging to my knees. But some of my ties, it's very hard to tie them without having that back piece be way longer than the front one. So it's good to know that I'm not the only person who will tuck it into my waistband to disguise that fact. Mary says things definitely move places as you get older. Yes, they do. Gravity is one of those laws of the universe that none of us can exactly break. And today a lot of people are maintaining a youthful appearance longer than they formerly did. Now, there are always some people who look younger than their age. One of the most famous of the early 20th century was Billy Burke. If you remember Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz, that's Billy Burke. Um, and she was a woman who looked 20 years younger than she was then. So it's not something that people are only doing now. The Empress Zoe of Byzantium, of the Eastern Roman Empire, famously still looked like she was in her 30s when she was in her 60s, and she worked hard to do that. Um, so there have always been some people who preserved that illusion of youth longer than others, but today it's a lot more common. But if you look at even the, shall we say, best preserved specimens, you'll still see the effects of gravity. They're not necessarily bad, but you'll see the shape of the face will change. Certain aspects of the features will show that aging has happened. And hello to Zane in the chat room. It's good to see you. Janet says skirts are always a challenge because I'm short. And, that's an interesting thing by itself. And one of the things that Lady Crystal taught me many years ago, because she wore skirts, which I do not, but she felt that she had a particular length of skirt that looked better on her than any other, and she always looked for that length in her skirt. It didn't matter what fashion said. When skirts got longer, for the most part, hers did not. When skirts got shorter, for the most part, hers did not. She liked her skirts at a certain length because she felt that it made her legs look longer and more shapely. And for every person, there will be certain things you prefer, and skirts are one of those things. Some women, or men, because there are men who wear skirts, really like the very long skirts, and others do not. And it's more than at any other time. It's a matter entirely of personal choice. But if you're looking for skirts, and for example, if you're looking online, and we do plan to offer our Gaia Thrift products online, it is good to know the length of the skirt so that you will know how long it's going to be on you. The other thing that I find interesting with skirts, and shirts for that matter, unless they're made for you, the hem is not always going to be even. Depending on the shape of your body, the hem may be much longer in front than in back, which is something that I'm personally rather cognizant of. Now, I always wear my shirts tucked in, so it doesn't really matter. But I notice it with my jackets. And when I wear a jacket, it because of the shape of my back, the jacket usually tends to be a little shorter in back than in front. But if I button it, that takes care of the problem. It's one of the reasons I always preferred longer jackets, but they're much harder to find. And these are all things to consider when you're looking for clothing. The nice thing about thrifting is that you can find nice clothes without having a major investment in them. We have a beautiful shirt just now in a purple brocade, a purple metallic brocade. And I'll probably be highlighting that sometime next week. Beautiful shirt. Doesn't fit anyone who has walked into that store. I would love to have it myself as a vest rather than as a shirt, but it's not going to do that for me. But it's an absolutely beautiful piece. If you found that in a store, it would be quite an expensive piece. But in a thrift store, it's not expensive at all. And even if you wanted to buy it to make something else out of, it would be very useful for that. One of the things I used to do, I'm still a member of the Fellowship of Isis. I'm an archpriest of Isis. I expect to be taking part in this year's Chicago Fellowship of Isis Festival, at least attending. I did take part in last year's a little bit because I was also at the Parliament of the World's Religions. So, I was not at the Fellowship of Isis Festival, but I did join them for the Parliament of World Religions when they put on a special evening. But back in the 90s, 80s, I was very active in the Chicago Fellowship of ISIS, and we did wonderful um, mystery plays in the Fellowship of ISIS. The Fellowship of ISIS liturgy is pretty much all mystery plays, and Lady Dina, who was the leading priestess in Chicago, always staged these as full-blown theatrical presentations with costumes. And one of the things I used to do was get fabulous fabrics from the thrift store to make the costumes from, to make the robes or other things that were needed. Also for my altar fittings. Very often you can get beautiful brocades and silks and curtains and so forth for very small sums at the thrift store. That would be very expensive fabric if you were buying it new. I love brocade in particular, things like Dupioni silk, and they make beautiful altars. And you can put them together in all sorts of different ways to keep the feeling of your altar fresh. But the best way to get a large collection of them is through things like thrift stores. Not buying them new, where they're going to be quite expensive, but buying someone else's trash that can become your treasure. And hello to Steve in the chat room, who says hello and good day, Reverend Don. Good day to you, Steve. And today is our roundup of stories from the week, but I don't really have any stories because I've been totally focused on myself this week and everything going on in my life. So we're talking a little bit about my birthday, a little bit about Gaia Thrift. I did have, for a person who's trying very hard to stay away from sugar, I had 2 lovely birthday cakes. A wonderful chocolate cake that was brought to me by the Archpriestess Christiana and Company, and a carrot cake supplied by Renee and Company, and they were both delicious. And I had just enough to say that I celebrated. Probably more sugar than the previous month put together. And, I find I don't really miss a lot of sweets. If you had asked me when I was younger, I probably would have said I had a sweet tooth. But looking back, something changed. I couldn't even tell you when it was because it was before this. And I can still enjoy sweet things, but I don't find myself looking for them for the most part. I find that I still quite enjoy rich food, but I'm not really given to the sweet food. Although I do love some of the artistry that you see in cake design, for example. I often talk about things I follow on Instagram. And a lot of the things I follow and or encounter are cooking presentations. I follow a lot of international cooking channels where I get to see different ways that people prepare their food. Some of them are very humorous. Some of them are very straightforward. One that I follow is called The 18th Century Chef, who does only 18th century recipes in 18th century ways. On Instagram, I follow the Early American channel, which also primarily does late 18th and early 19th century cooking in the way that they did it. Hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you, Michael. And I find this fascinating. The idea of cooking over an open fire, which is what they did then, is something that only a few people now remember how to do. And it's fascinating to see it done. They do things I would not have thought of, because why would I? I've except occasionally for camping or cookouts, I don't see people cooking over open fires, certainly not in fireplaces. So it's fascinating to see how that's done. But, I also follow various international cooking programs. One of the ones I've been following lately is called Eat Like a Soviet. And the host is an extremely stereotypical comic figure of a Soviet person talking about traditional Russian cuisine from that era. And it's interesting. Some of it I look at and think, I really don't want to try that, and others look absolutely delicious. I just find international cuisine absolutely fascinating and the different things people do with their food. Um, but I also follow a lot of clothing channels, and this will bring us back to clothing. I see that vintage fashion apparently is very popular these days, including with many young people who are quite enjoying the more formal aspect of how people used to dress. Now, as you know, if you follow me, I tend to dress that way and have most of my life. In the 90s, I relaxed a little bit. But, the subject was brought up over the weekend of casual clothing, and the answer is no, there is none in my wardrobe, and there's not going to be. I don't like it. I like the way that I do dress, and I treat dressing as a work of art. And I will admit, I don't always wear a tie, especially around the house. But I more often than not, if I'm leaving the house, I will wear a jacket and or a tie for most things. And part of that is because I look at this as a creative exercise. In my mind, putting the colors together, putting the styles together is not only a means of self-expression, but a means of creation. And it keeps my brain working, for one thing. So I certainly will continue dressing the way that I do. And I'm personally happy to see greater creativity um, with a lot of young people. And Steve says, yes, love international cuisines. I have rarely ever met a style of cuisine I did not like. I'm not going to say never, but even when I have, there's always something that I can find that I like. Um, but the vast majority of international cuisines, I pretty much enjoy all of them. Um, and it would be hard. I'd be hard pressed to think what I don't um, enjoy. And each one is so very different. I mean, if you compare Russian cuisine and Ethiopian cuisine, there's very little in common between these two cuisines, but I love them both. If you were to compare Mexican cuisine and German cuisine, there's very little in common between these two cuisines, but I love them both. Um, and I love seeing the different ways that people treat their food, the different ways they dress, the different ways they do everything. And I find it fascinating to see the variety of life on Earth. In Star Trek, and partly due to the influence of Lady Bitterwind, Star Trek was a major influence on my life. She was a Trekkie way back in the 70s, long before the revival of Star Trek, when everybody was hoping maybe there'd be a second coming of Star Trek. So I've been surrounded by that energy. But they have the Vulcan idea of infinite diversity and infinite combination. And I really do think that this is a good description of one of the best aspects of being alive. I love to see the different ways of doing things. As a very mundane example, I think I was scrolling through Facebook the other day. As much as I post on Facebook, obviously I look at it. And I saw a class being held um, for what appeared to be teenagers on how to use cutlery in a proper traditional way. And the lady started by pointing out the difference between European styles and American styles. And if you're not familiar with that, the way that Europeans use their cutlery is very different from how Americans use their cutlery. Americans use an older fashion for cutlery, as we do for many things, whereas it continued to evolve in Europe. But that difference is very, very fascinating to me to see. The different ways of serving food. One of the things that you probably would not ever think of is that in the 18th century, when food was served at the great feasts of the day, it was created and served in a totally different manner than what you'd receive now. If you were invited to someone's Sunday dinner, for example, in the 18th century, um, it would be laid out in a very different way, a wider range of dishes, and not the idea that everyone would try everything, but rather that there'd be something for everyone's taste, with the idea that what did not get eaten would be eaten later in the week. Um, and a lot of cooking was done during that that Sunday occasion, which for a lot of people was their big day, and then a lot more warming over and or eating of cold meals later in the week, depending on the household, depending on what was there. But the way that the food was laid out on the table followed a specific grid. I don't know all the details of that grid. I've seen it. It's way too complex for me. But there'd be something for every taste. Very different from what we do today. Um, Partly because it's so much easier to cook today. And when you watch some of these older programs, one of the things you cannot but come away from it with is the difference that technology has made and how easy it is for us to prepare our food. Um, in some cases, we just go to the microwave and warm it for a couple of minutes. But even if we're doing full-on cooking, compared to 200 years ago, it's a breeze by comparison. One of the other things I follow a number of are various Italian cooks, such as Nonna Pia and Nonna Gracie, and the two Patties, who don't usually do cooking, but they do a lot of commentary on anything Italian, and it including other people's Italian cooking. And just the other day, I was watching an Instagram talking about what you could expect at a Sunday lunch in Italy. If you were invited to an ordinary family's Sunday lunch. And I think it was 7 courses and 2 desserts, with video of all of them, and they looked wonderful. And not quite sure what to say for that. The other day, Nonna Pia was making limoncello at home, and there was a lot of talk about this lovely drink, limoncello, um, which is basically a lemon alcoholic drink. Beautiful drink, but so simple to make at home. And apparently in Italy, people make this at home all the time. Interesting things we learn in our much smaller world today. I saw a post on Facebook earlier today saying, if you could, would you go back to the 70s when we didn't have all this technology? And my answer is, oh my goodness, no. For one thing, I was there in the 70s. And it was a very different world. There were many good things, certainly. There are always many good things. But the ease of learning today. And yes, there's a lot of disinformation too, but there was then as well. If you know what you're doing, you can educate yourself on any subject today so much more easily than you could then. You can learn so much. You can meet and talk with people all over the world. It is so much better today. I would not remotely consider going back to that world myself. And I think that very often when people do think they'd like to go back to it, they're not really remembering it honestly. They're only remembering the good. And I saw again that post that I so often remark on about The good old days when witchcraft was underground, because today Becky can buy her sage at Whole Foods. And all I can say is that if you were actually there in the good old days, if we want to call them that, you would have been absolutely ecstatic to be able to get your magical ingredients as easily as we can get them today. It would have been paradise, because so often you couldn't get these things for anything unless you happened to be in a particular area, or they were very, very expensive and hard to find. Today, we can get anything. It really is so much better. But with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to thank everyone for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the program. I don't know if we can really call it a wrap-up of stories, but it was a pleasant conversation. And so thank you all for joining me. I love spending this time with you. I do enjoy some of these rambling conversations. And I will be back on Monday, and we will do another week. And now, let us close as we always do with our prayer. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for everything that you do for us in our lives. And we thank you for this wonderful world you provide for us, and the ease of our generation in being able to reach across it and deep within it that no previous generation has enjoyed. We thank you for the riches that we live in that no previous generation has enjoyed. And though we may sometimes be taken back by changes in pricing or what have you, let us remain mindful of the fact that we have greater abundance and prosperity than the royalty of previous ages, even in hard times. And let us enjoy the wonderful things that are here and see the good in them. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all of these things you do in our lives and for your presence in our lives. And knowing you are always with us, from respect, we thank you for that presence. And may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I will see you Monday